Ji-eum is living her 19th life, but her unique ability to remember each of her past rebirths makes her life difficult. Ever since she was a child, she has realized that she is not like other children, and her many memories of the past have filled her mind, creating an invisible barrier between her and those around her. Now, in her current life, she decides to find Seo-ha, a man who held an important place in her previous incarnation. He was part of her life when she was a little girl in her 18th rebirth, but tragic events cut short their meeting. Ji-eum remembers her past very well, including those moments involving Seo-ha. In her previous life, she was another woman, and her brief but emotional connection with Seo-ha left a deep mark. Now that she has been reborn again, Ji-eum decides to find him and continue what was interrupted. However, Seo-ha doesn't remember her and has no idea that there is such an ability as reincarnation. From the very beginning, Ji-eum shows confidence and determination as she sets out to meet Seo-ha. Not only does she remember every detail of their past encounters, but she also realizes that the past carries burdens that could affect their relationship in the present. Seo-ha, whom she decides to meet, has suffered a tragedy since childhood that has left deep emotional scars. Ji-eum realizes that her path to him will be difficult, because not only does he not recognize her, he may have closed his heart to a new relationship altogether. Ji-eum begins to make a plan to get closer to Seo-ha. She decides to use her knowledge and experience from her past lives to get as close to him as possible without revealing her secret. Her goal is to reunite with him, but she realizes it will be difficult. She will have to win his trust again, but in a new guise and in a different life. Meanwhile, Seo-ha leads a quiet and somewhat isolated life. He is rich, successful, but lonely. A loss that occurred in his childhood has greatly affected his emotional state. He has become closed and cautious in his dealings with others, preferring to stay away from people so as not to put himself at risk of new pain. This is the kind of man Ji-eum will have to build a relationship with. She knows that his past still influences his decisions in the present, but is willing to fight for her place in his life. When Ji-eum sees Seo-ha for the first time in the present, she is overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions, the joy of finding him and the pain of realizing that he doesn't remember her. She keeps her composure, however, and decides that her first meeting with him should happen naturally, without undue pressure. She wants to get to know him again and give him the opportunity to get to know her, even if not right away. Using information about Seo-ha and his company, Ji-eum takes a job with his organization. This is the first step in her plan to be close to him, observe him, and gradually gain his trust. She realizes that despite all her determination, it will take time for him to open his heart, but she's not afraid of challenges. Ji-eum knows that her goal is not just to get Seo-ha back on track, but to help him deal with his inner demons that have stayed with him since the tragedy of his child. At work, Ji-eum quickly finds common ground with her colleagues but tries not to attract too much attention to herself. Her job is to keep a low profile and gradually approach Seo-ha. She tries to interact with him in a way that doesn't arouse suspicion, but also gives him support in times of need. She senses that Seo-ha needs help, even if he doesn't recognize it himself. Seo-ha, in turn, begins to notice Ji-eum. There's something about her that seems familiar to him, though he can't explain it logically. Their first meetings at work are polite and aloof, but Seo-ha feels an incomprehensible attraction to her. He can't remember where or when he might have seen her, but her presence gives him a strange feeling, as if something long forgotten is beginning to return to his mind. Ji-eum takes her time. She knows that Seo-ha is living with pain and that he needs time to start trusting people. She tries not to impose her society on him, but she stays close to him, helping him with his work and supporting him in difficult moments. She feels that their connection from their past lives still exists, even if Seo-ha doesn't remember it. Gradually, they begin to spend more time together, discussing work projects and even sharing personal thoughts. Meanwhile, Ji-eum meets Yoon Joo-won, the younger sister of a person from her previous life who played an important role in Ji-eum's destiny. Joo-won has no idea who Ji-eum really is, but begins to feel sympathy for her as a new colleague. Ji-eum, in turn, feels a deep emotional connection to Joo-won, knowing her from her previous life. However, as with Seo-ha, she decides not to reveal her secrets and keep her distance, gradually finding common ground with Joo-won. Ji-eum realizes that her task in this life is more complicated than she ever imagined. Not only does she have to win Seo-ha's love again, but she also has to help those around her deal with their inner problems. She realizes that her ability to remember past lives can be both a gift and a curse. After all, even though she knows what's ahead of her, she can't predict how her relationship with Seo-ha will play out in this life. After meeting Seo-ha, Ji-eum is even more certain of her decision to re-enter his life. She remembers every detail of their past life and knows how important Seo-ha was to her in the previous incarnation. In this life, however, things are different. He doesn't remember her and probably won't recognize her. Ji-eum realizes that she should be by his side, but she can't reveal her secret right away. Now that she has found him and gets a job at his company, her main task becomes to slowly and gradually get closer to him. Ji-eum takes a job at Seo-ha's company, deciding that this will be her first step into his world. The company he runs is large and successful, and working here is a great opportunity to be close to him without arousing suspicion. She realizes that Seo-ha lives with deep emotional wounds, and that the past has left a mark on him that prevents him from opening up to people. Ji-eum also knows that Seo-ha doesn't trust anyone, especially after what happened in his childhood. She'll need to win his trust, but she'll have to proceed carefully. Ji-eum's first day at the company is a challenge. Her coworkers are friendly, but she tries to keep a low profile. She doesn't want to draw too much attention to herself, although her inner goal is to get closer to Seo-ha. At the same time, she needs to build relationships with other coworkers so that she can become part of the team without arousing suspicion. At work, she meets Yoon Joo-won, the younger sister of someone who was important in her past life. For Ji-eum, the encounter triggers an emotional response, as Joo-won unknowingly meets the person she is related to in her past life. Joo-won immediately notices Ji-eum's unusual behavior and manner, but doesn't pay much attention to it yet. To her, Ji-eum is just a new coworker, but Joo-won feels sympathy for her. Ji-eum, on the other hand, realizes that she not only has to gain Seo-ha's trust, but also connect with Joo-won. The past binds them closely together, and though Joo-won doesn't know it, Ji-eum feels responsible for their connection. Seo-ha, though busy running the company, begins to notice the new employee. Her presence triggers strange feelings in him that he can't explain. Every time they cross paths in the office, Seo-ha feels a slight sense of déjà vu. He feels like he's seen this woman before, but can't remember where or when. However, as a rational and cautious man, he doesn't pay much attention to it, continuing to work, but the inner feeling of a strange attraction to Ji-eum never leaves him. Ji-eum, despite her inner emotions, remains cool-headed. She knows that her goal is not only to meet Seo-ha again, but to gradually reawaken his memories, or at least his emotional attachment. To do that, she needs to proceed carefully without showing how important he is to her. Seo-ha, for his part, begins to notice that an invisible bond is forming between them that he can't explain. Ji-eum becomes his shadow at work. She's around, but always keeps her distance, not trying to arouse suspicion. Seo-ha continues to remain withdrawn and closed off, despite his successes at work. His inner pain and emotional wounds prevent him from trusting people easily. He prefers to focus on management company, avoiding close relationship, even with those who have been working with him for a long time. Ji-eum sees it and realizes that its task will be more difficult than it represents. To get close with Seo-ha, she has to gradually destroy the wall that he built around himself. At work, they begin to cross more often, and Seo-ha begins to notice in Ji-eum something unusual. He can't exactly explain that he attracts in it, but each of their interaction causes him mixed feelings, from easy anxiety to unexplainable comfort. He feels like he knows her, but can't remember where from. It is intrinsic sensation confounding it with the crowd, and Seo-ha begins to doubt its instincts. Ji-eum, for her part, feels that she's making the right moves, and that Seo-ha is slowly starting to notice her. Her goal is to build a relationship that will eventually lead to the restoration of the connection they had in their past lives. But she realizes that her task is complicated not only by his emotional blocks, but also by the fact that she can't reveal the truth about her reincarnation. She is forced to compromise and proceed carefully so as not to destroy everything she is trying to build. Meanwhile, Joo-won becomes more and more interested in Ji-eum. Her curiosity about her new colleague grows, but she can't figure out why she's so attracted to her. Joo-won senses something familiar in Ji-eum, but like Seo-ha, can't explain it. Ji-eum, realizing this, begins to build a friendship with Joo-won, though her feelings for her are complicated because of her past. After Ban Ji-eum takes a job at Moon Seo-ha's company and begins to gradually grow closer to him, her path to reunion becomes increasingly difficult. Seo-ha, though he notices her, remains closed off and immersed in his own problems and tragedies. His life, despite his outward well-being, is filled with pain from the losses he experienced as a child. Ji-eum realizes that it is up to her to not only rekindle their bond, but also to help him deal with these difficult memories. Ji-eum begins to learn more and more about Seo-ha's life. Through work and shared projects, she gradually gets closer to him. But her goal is not just to establish a working relationship, but to reawaken memories or at least feelings from their past lives. It's hard for her to be around him and still maintain the appearance of a normal working relationship. Every time she sees Seo-ha, a painful sense of loss flares up in her heart because he, the person who was so important to her in her past life, doesn't remember her. Meanwhile, Seo-ha increasingly notices strange feelings about Ji-eum. Every time they meet, his inner sense of déjà vu intensifies. He feels like he's seen her before, though he can't remember when or where. Ji-eum acts reserved, not giving the appearance that she knows more than he does. But inside, she's torn between the desire to tell him the truth and the fear that he won't accept her revelation. At the same time, Seo-ha is facing his inner demons. He's still going through the trauma of being lost as a child, and it's preventing him from opening up to people fully. His heart is closed, and even the simplest attempts to connect with him emotionally are met with a wall of mistrust. Ji-eum sees this and realizes that his road to healing will be a long one. She needs to be there to help him through these internal barriers, but to do so she needs to gain his trust. Back at the office, the relationship between Ji-eum and Seo-ha grows a little warmer. They start working together on projects, and Seo-ha relies more and more on her professionalism and support. On an emotional level, however, Seo-ha still keeps her distance, and Ji-eum realizes that she needs time to get into his heart. One day, Ji-eum gets a chance to learn more about Seo-ha's personal life. She finds him in his office at a late hour as he sits alone, immersed in his thoughts. Seo-ha looks especially vulnerable at this moment, and Ji-eum realizes that this is her chance. She begins the conversation cautiously, careful not to disturb his space. Seo-ha, unexpectedly to himself, begins to share his thoughts about his past and the tragedy that happened in his childhood. It's an emotional moment for Ji-eum, because she knows he's talking about events that relate to their previous lives. Seo-ha talks about his childhood love, how he lost someone important to him, and how that loss changed his entire life. He doesn't give a name, but Ji-eum knows he's talking about her, about the life they had together. She feels Seo-ha's pain, his anguish, and her heart squeezes at the realization that he's still living with those memories, even if he doesn't realize it was her. Ji-eum wants to tell him the truth, but realizes this isn't the time or place for such revelations. After this conversation, Ji-eum decides to dig even deeper into Seo-ha's life and see how she can help him deal with his past. She sees that Seo-ha is tangled up in his feelings and emotions, and that his path to healing is still a long way off, but she's willing to be there for him no matter what. She believes that their connection from their past lives can still be restored, but she needs patience to do so. At the same time, Ha-do-yeon, Seo-ha's close friend, begins to notice changes in his behavior. He knows that Seo-ha avoids personal contact and keeps people away from him, but with the appearance of Ji-eum, he begins to see changes in him. Do-yeon suspects that Ji-eum is hiding something, and begins to observe their interactions. He finds it strange that Seo-ha is starting to talk about the past more and more, and this makes him suspicious of the new female employee. Ji-eum realizes that her actions are attracting attention, and this could jeopardize her plan. She doesn't want to arouse suspicion and tries to behave carefully so as not to draw unnecessary attention to herself. However, her inner emotions are growing stronger and it starts to show in her actions. Seo-ha notices that Ji-eum is becoming more and more important to him, but he can't explain it. He awakens feelings in him that he buried long ago, and this causes him internal conflict. At work, Ji-eum also becomes close to Yoon Joo-won, the younger sister of a man from her past life. Joo-won doesn't know the truth about Ji-eum, but their relationship grows warmer and closer. Ji-eum feels a deep connection with Joo-won, though she hides her true motives from her. Her goal is not only to get closer to Seo-ha, but also to help Joo-won, whose life has also been affected by their shared past. Joo-won, in turn, begins to trust Ji-eum and even shares her personal experiences with her. She talks about her problems and how lonely she feels after her tragic loss. Ji-eum realizes that Joo-won is suffering from the same wounds as Seo-ha, and that she needs to help both of them deal with their pain. At the end of the episode, Seo-ha begins to think about Ji-eum more and more often. Her presence in his life becomes more and more significant, and he begins to question whether she's just an ordinary employee. Feelings he buried long ago are awakening in him, and it makes him fearful. Seo-ha is not ready to open again coma, especially after that it happened in his childhood, but Ji-eum becomes for him more important. Inner conflict between the desire to trust and insurance before it becomes stronger. After how Ji-eum began to establish more closely relationship with Seo-ha, its internal fear and doubt only strengthened. It sees that Seo-ha begins to experience more than just professional respect but still remains closed emotionally. Ji-eum understands that Seo-ha everything else connected with the past pain, and it hinders him completely open. Against these feelings, it continues to keep secret the truth of their past life, fearing that revelation may destroy their painful connection. Meanwhile, Seo-ha begins to realize that his strange attraction to Ji-eum is getting stronger. Although he can't explain it logically, every time they work together or just meet in the office, he feels a sense of déjà vu. These feelings begin to worry him, as he has always tried to avoid deep emotional connections after the tragedy that happened to him as a child. However, Ji-eum gradually enters his life, and Seo-ha begins to trust her more and more, although he doesn't fully realize it himself. Ha-do-yeon, Seo-ha's best friend and main assistant, also begins to notice that Seo-ha is changing under Ji-eum's influence. Do-yeon can't ignore the fact that Seo-ha, usually reserved and closed off, is interacting more and more with the new female employee. Do-yeon decides to find out more about Ji-eum because her sudden appearance in Seo-ha's life makes him suspicious. He begins to notice that Ji-eum acts like she's known Seo-ha for a long time, even though they've only recently met. Ji-eum realizes that she needs to be careful not to raise Do-yeon's suspicions too much. She sees that he is a man loyal to Seo-ha and will protect him at all costs. Her task becomes even more difficult, as she not only needs to get closer to Seo-ha, but also to avoid conflict with Do-yeon. She starts to feel the pressure, realizing that her plan could fall apart if someone finds out her secret too soon. Meanwhile, Seo-ha and Ji-eum continue to work together on an important project at the company. As they work, Seo-ha increasingly feels that he can rely on Ji-eum not only professionally but also personally. He begins to share his thoughts with her, even though it's hard for him to do so. Every time he opens up to her, he feels an inner tension related to the past, but Ji-eum gradually helps him deal with this pain. Her presence in his life begins to have a positive effect on him. Seo-ha doesn't even notice as he begins to spend more time with Ji-eum, both at work and outside of work. They meet alone more and more often, and their conversations become more candid. Seo-ha feels that Ji-eum is someone he can confide his innermost feelings to, but he doesn't yet fully understand why he's so attracted to her. He starts asking himself questions about who she really is, and where this sense of familiarity that hasn't left him since they first met comes from. Ji-eum, for her part, begins to realize more and more that her feelings for Seo-ha are blossoming again. Despite her fears, she begins to feel that her mission in this life is not only to help him overcome his pain, but also to recapture the love they lost in the past. However, she continues to keep the truth about her reincarnation a secret, realizing that Seo-ha may not accept her revelation. She's afraid that if she tells him the truth, she'll ruin everything they've started to build. Meanwhile, Cho-won, the younger sister of the man from Ji-eum's past, also begins to feel a strange connection to her. Cho-won thinks more and more often that there is something familiar about Ji-eum, something that makes her feel trusted and attached. She's trying to figure out why she's so drawn to her new colleague, but she can't yet find an explanation for her feelings. Ji-eum, for her part, tries to bond with Cho-won, feeling that their connection from their past lives is still strong, even if Cho-won doesn't know it. Every day, Seo-ha realizes more and more that his life is changing because of Ji-eum. He begins to think about the fact that their meeting wasn't just a coincidence. He becomes convinced that Ji-eum is somehow connected to his past, though he can't yet tell exactly how. Suddenly, Seo-ha decides that he needs to know more about her and starts looking for information about her past. This move comes as a surprise to him, since he usually tries to avoid personal matters with his coworkers. Ji-eum, sensing that Seo-ha is becoming curious about her past, realizes that the time for revelation is approaching. She realizes that she can no longer hide the truth, but she's still afraid that Seo-ha will reject her when she finds out that she's not just a random person in his life, but someone he was involved with in a previous rebirth. Her fears are heightened when Seo-ha increasingly asks questions about her life before they met. After a significant moment at a corporate event where the emotional tension between Ban Ji-eum and Moon Seo had become palpable, Ji-eum begins to feel even more pressure to reveal the truth about her reincarnation. She realizes that their bond is becoming too strong to continue hiding her true motives. However, fear of the possible repercussions of this revelation still holds her back. Her soul is torn between her desire for honesty and her fear that Seo-ha might reject her if she learns the truth. Seo-ha, for his part, also can't ignore his emotions. It's becoming increasingly difficult for him to hide that he feels more than just coworker sympathy for Ji-eum, but something deeper is stopping him. His mind resists. Seo-ha still can't quite explain where this strange attraction comes from, or why Ji-eum seems familiar to him. These inner doubts cause him to keep his distance despite his growing feelings. Meanwhile, Ha Do-yeon, Seo-ha's best friend, continues to watch the relationship between Seo-ha and Ji-eum develop. His suspicions grow. Do-yeon doesn't understand why Ji-eum has so quickly found an approach to Seo-ha, who usually keeps people at a distance. Moreover, he begins to guess that Ji-eum knows more about Seo-ha than meets the eye. Do-yeon decides to find out what she's hiding, and gradually begins to seek information about her past. His goal is to protect Seo-ha, who he feels trusts the new employee too much. Ji-eum, sensing that her plan may be jeopardized by Do-yeon's growing suspicion, decides to focus on strengthening her relationship with Seo-ha. She continues to find ways to be there for him, helping him through difficult situations and supporting him when he faces challenges at work. She hopes that these moments of bonding will help Seo-ha see her as someone to rely on. Although Seo-ha is still not ready to fully open up, he gradually begins to realize that Ji-eum plays a much bigger role in his life than he ever imagined. At the same time, Ji-eum grows increasingly close to Yoon Joo-won, the younger sister of the man from her past rebirth. Cho-won begins to sense something special in Ji-eum, though she herself doesn't realize where the feeling comes from. This is a difficult situation for Ji-eum, as Cho-won is a link to her past, and the memories of that life weigh heavily on her current emotions. However, Ji-eum continues to maintain her friendship with Cho-won, realizing that it is also part of her mission in this life to take care of those she used to love. On a workday, Seo-ha and Ji-eum find themselves locked out of the office due to a sudden violent thunderstorm, which gives them a chance to spend some time alone. At first they talk about work, but gradually the conversation turns to more personal topics. Seo-ha suddenly begins to open up to Ji-eum, talking about his fears and worries about the tragedy from his childhood. He shares that he has a hard time trusting people after losing someone important to him. For Ji-eum, it's a moment where her heart clenches with pain as she knows that she was the one Seo-ha lost in his past rebirth. This conversation becomes a turning point for both of them. Seo-ha begins to feel like she can trust Ji-eum more than she can trust anyone else, and Ji-eum realizes that their bond from their past lives is still strong. She begins to think that perhaps it's time to reveal the truth to him, since Seo-ha seems ready to accept something unusual in their relationship. At the last moment, however, fear stops her again. Fear that Seo-ha won't be able to accept her revelation that she's not just a woman from his present, but the reincarnation of someone he knew as a child. After Seo-ha asks Ji-eum to spend the evening together, a new phase of their relationship begins between them. They spend more time alone together, and Seo-ha gradually begins to open up, revealing her vulnerability and deep inner feelings. This is a step forward for Ji-eum, but she continues to struggle with the fear of revealing the truth about her reincarnations. She realizes that Seo-ha may not be ready to accept such an incredible fact, and fears that her revelation will destroy everything they've already managed to build. During their walk, Seo-ha seems more relaxed than usual. He begins to talk openly about his childhood, how he lost the person he loved, and how that loss changed his entire life. He confesses that he hasn't trusted people since then, and that Ji-eum is the first person in a long time that he feels comfortable with. These words touch Ji-eum, because she knows that Seo-ha is talking specifically about her, about who she was in her past life. Her heart clenches with pain, because she feels like she should tell him the truth, but she still can't make up her mind. Meanwhile, Ha Do-yeon continues to follow the progress of their relationship. He becomes more and more convinced that Ji-eum is hiding something important. His suspicions become so strong that he decides to conduct his own investigation, trying to find out more about Ji-eum's past. He's concerned that Seo-ha might get hurt again if he confides in someone he doesn't know enough about. Do-yeon decides that it is his duty to protect Seo-ha, even if it means confronting Ji-eum. At work, Ji-eum continues to interact with Yoon Joo-won. Cho-won becomes increasingly attached to Ji-eum, and their friendship begins to grow stronger. Ji-eum feels a deep emotional connection with Cho-won, knowing that they were connected in a past life. However, she still hesitates to tell her the truth, realizing that it might shock Cho-won. Nevertheless, their communication becomes increasingly warm, and Ji-eum feels that Cho-won is beginning to trust her as a true friend. One day, Seo-ha suggests that Ji-eum spend the weekend together, going on a little trip out of town. This is a huge step for Seo-ha, since he's always avoided personal relationships and tried to stay away from people. He feels that Ji-eum is helping him overcome his fears, and that she's the only person he can be himself around. Ji-eum agrees to the trip, but her heart is heavy at the thought of having to reveal the truth to Seo-ha soon. During the trip, the two spend a lot of time together talking about life, memories, and dreams for the future. Seo-ha talks about how he always wanted to find someone to share his life with, but was afraid of losing that person again. Ji-eum realizes that her time is running out. She needs to decide if she's willing to risk everything and tell him the truth about being reincarnated in order to find him and right the wrongs of the past. As their trip continues, Ji-eum begins to feel the bond between them grow stronger. She sees Seo-ha opening up to her more and more, and it gives her hope that he can accept the truth. However, she wonders if Seo-ha will be able to love her, knowing that she's not just a new woman in his life but someone he lost in a past life. After Ji-eum decides to tell Seo-ha the truth about her reincarnation, the tension between them reaches a breaking point. She knows that this moment will be a turning point in their relationship, and realizes that Seo-ha can either accept her truth or reject it by not believing the incredible story about past lives. Ji-eum sighs deeply, and gathering her thoughts, begins to talk about her unusual ability to remember all their previous lives and that they've met before. Seo-ha listens to her with obvious disbelief. He can't believe that what she's telling is real. Her story seems too fantastic, too far removed from his rational world where everything can be explained with logic and evidence. Yet something inside him makes him wonder. He always felt like he knew Ji-eum without even realizing where the feeling came from. Now her words sound like an explanation for this strange sense of familiarity that hasn't left him since they first met. Ji-eum tells Seo-ha about how she's lived in different eras, changing bodies but retaining memories of her past lives. She explains that in one of her lives, she was his significant other that he lost as a child. Seo-ha begins to remember his first love and the terrible accident that took her away. He can't believe that the person standing in front of him now is the same girl he shared his childhood with and who left his life so tragically. These memories shake Seo-ha. He stands back, trying to comprehend what he's heard. His world is turned upside down. He had always believed that reincarnation was a myth, something out of the realm of fiction. But now, in the face of this story, his mind struggles with inner doubts. He feels that his usual rational approach to life is crumbling. Seo-ha doesn't know how to react. He is overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Ji-eum realizes that telling him about her past didn't just shock Seo-ha, it put him in front of a choice that could affect their future. She watches him shut himself away, not knowing what to say. Her heart aches as she realizes that she could lose him before their relationship has a chance to take hold. After a long pause, Seo-ha asks why Ji-eum didn't tell him about this earlier. He feels betrayed that she kept this information from him, and his disbelief only grows stronger. Ji-eum, desperate to explain, says that she was afraid of losing him, that she thought he couldn't believe her, and that they could never build a relationship if she revealed the truth too soon. Seo-ha gets up and moves away from her. He can't figure out what to do with this new information. He needs a pause, time to reflect on everything he's heard. He tells Ji-eum that he doesn't know if he can continue a relationship with her, knowing that their bond is based on something so inexplicable and fantastic. He asks her to give him time to think about it, and walks away, leaving her alone at the top of the hill with a confused and painful feeling on her heart. Ji-eum is left alone, watching Seo-ha walk away. She realizes that her revelation has broken the thin thread that bound them together, and that she might have lost him forever. Despite the pain, however, she doesn't regret her decision to tell the truth. It was important to her that Seo-ha knew who she really was, and that their meeting was not an accident, but fate that brought them together after so many lifetimes. Meanwhile, back at the company, Ha-do-yeon continues his own investigation, trying to find out more about Ji-eum's past. He discovers that her background is full of mysteries and oddities, and this only heightens his suspicions. Do-yeon senses that she is hiding something important, and his concern for Seo-ha grows. After Seo-ha learns the truth about Ji-eum and her reincarnations, he falls into deep thought. His usual world based on rationality and logic has collapsed under the weight of the incredible truth. He spends the entire next day alone, trying to make sense of what Ji-eum has told him. He tries to figure out how he should feel about her, because their whole story is more complicated and deeper than he could have imagined. Ji-eum, for her part, is in agonizing suspense. She realizes that revealing the truth was a huge risk, and now she must accept the consequences of her revelation. She is tormented by the thought that Seo-ha might reject her, but despite her fear, Ji-eum is certain that she should have been honest with him. She hopes that in time, Seo-ha will realize that their connection isn't just an accident, but part of a deeper destiny that binds them through several lives. Seo-ha can't shake the feeling that his life has been turned upside down. He realizes that there has always been something inexplicable between them, but now that this inexplicable has taken the form of reincarnation, he doesn't know what to do. He has a hard time accepting that his memories of the past are indeed connected to Ji-eum, and that she is the person he loved as a child. The question of whether he can pursue a relationship with someone who has lived several lives already and knows him so deeply keeps him on edge. Trying to make sense of his feelings, Seo-ha recalls the moments when he felt inexplicably close to Ji-eum. All the strange moments of déjà vu and attraction now begin to make sense. He realizes that his feelings for her were real, even if he didn't realize why that was the case. But the fact that Ji-eum has lived multiple lives and remembers his past still makes him feel vulnerable and confused. Meanwhile, Ha-do-yeon, who continues his investigation, becomes more and more suspicious. He finds strange details in Ji-eum's past that confirm his hunch that she's not who she says she is. Do-yeon decides to talk to Seo-ha directly, warning him that Ji-eum may be dangerous or that her intentions may not be as pure as they seem. However, Seo-ha, though full of doubt, can't believe that Ji-eum could actually harm him. He still feels a strong emotional attachment to her, and this prevents him from making a decision. At work, the situation is also starting to get complicated. Seo-ha tries to keep his distance from Ji-eum to sort out his feelings, but her presence still weighs heavily on him. Every time they cross paths at the office, Seo-ha can't shake the thought that it's all part of a larger fate, and that perhaps their connection was predestined. Ji-eum, for her part, notices that Seo-ha is trying to avoid her, and this causes her deep anxiety. She doesn't know what's going on in his head, and it torments her. Nevertheless, she realizes that she has to give him time to make sense of everything she's told him. Her only hope is that Seo-ha will be able to accept her for who she is, with all her secrets and complexities. One day at work, Seo-ha suddenly decides to talk to Ji-eum. They meet privately in his office, and Seo-ha is blunt about the fact that he needs more time. He admits that he's not ready to accept her truth right away, that he needs to make sense of it all. However, he also adds that he still feels attached to her and can't just end the relationship. He offers Ji-eum some time so that they can both sort out their feelings. It's a tough moment for Ji-eum, but she realizes that Seo-ha is right. She agrees to give him as much time as he needs, though her heart still aches with uncertainty. Inwardly, she prepares herself for the fact that Seo-ha may never accept her truth, but she still hopes that their bond from past lives is too strong to be broken. Meanwhile, Ji-eum and Yoon Joo-won's relationship continues to grow. Joo-won begins to trust Ji-eum even more, considering her a close friend. Ji-eum, despite her personal difficulties with Seo-ha, tries to support Joo-won, knowing that they were related in a past life. However, every time Ji-eum spends time with Joo-won, her heart clenches with pain because she can't tell her the truth about who they used to be to each other. After an emotional conversation between Ban Ji-eum and Moon Seo-ha, in which Seo-ha asked for time to think, their relationship temporarily comes to a standstill. Ji-eum is forced to wait patiently for his decision, but her anxiety only grows with each passing day. She realizes that discovering the whole truth about reincarnation has put Seo-ha in a difficult choice. Despite her misgivings, Ji-eum continues to believe that their connection is not just the result of chance, but the fate that brought them back together. Seo-ha, immersed in his own thoughts, tries to find a balance between his rational nature and what Ji-eum has told him. His memories of his childhood and the tragic loss of his first love have now taken on a completely different meaning. He realizes that Ji-eum is the girl he lost years ago. This discovery confuses him, but it also awakens in him a strange hope that their meeting was not an accident. Days pass, and Seo-ha is still not ready to make a final decision. He feels his emotional attachment to Ji-eum growing stronger, but at the same time, his inner skepticism and his habit of living in a world of logic and evidence prevent him from fully trusting her story. He keeps thinking that their relationship is based on something inexplicable that is beyond the world he is used to. His heart wants to believe Ji-eum, but his mind pulls him in the other direction. Ji-eum, feeling that she can't just sit and wait, decides to focus on work and strengthening her relationship with Yoon Joo-won. Her friendship with Cho-won becomes a pillar of support for her during this difficult time. Ji-eum knows that their bond from their past lives remains strong, and that she needs to help Cho-won even if she can't tell her the whole truth. Cho-won, in turn, trusts Ji-eum more and more, seeing her as a trusted friend. She shares her worries with her, unaware that Ji-eum knows much more than she reveals. Do-yeon continues his investigation. He is increasingly unhappy with Ji-eum's influence on Seo-ha, and decides he must do something about it. Do-yeon has known Seo-ha for a long time and has seen how Seo-ha has suffered after a tragedy as a child. He doesn't want Seo-ha to be trapped in emotional distress again, and he's afraid that Ji-eum might hurt him, even if her intentions were initially pure. Do-yeon tries to find out more about Ji-eum, and his search begins to yield its first results. Meanwhile, Seo-ha begins to realize that his feelings for Ji-eum have become stronger than he could have anticipated. Despite the strangeness of her story, he can't deny that there's something special between them. He remembers all the times he felt déjà vu when they met, and it begins to seem too much of a coincidence for it to be mere coincidence. The internal conflict between his mind and heart continues, but Seo-ha realizes that he can no longer avoid this conversation with Ji-eum. One day, Seo-ha decides to confront Ji-eum and have a frank conversation. He wants to know more about her past lives and how they were connected in a previous incarnation. Seo-ha becomes curious about the details of their past lives and how they ended up together again. It's a way for him to better understand if their destinies have really crossed over the centuries, or if it's just a coincidence he's trying to exaggerate. Ji-eum, seeing that Seo-ha is ready to talk, decides to tell him more about their past lives. She shares memories of how they met as children, the moments when they were together, and the tragic accident that took her life. Seo-ha begins to remember these moments, though at first it's hard for him to realize that it might be true. Ji-eum talks about her feelings, about how she's waited her whole life for this moment to meet him again. The conversation between them becomes increasingly emotional. Seo-ha begins to realize that his feelings for Ji-eum go beyond mere attraction. He feels that their connection may actually be deeper than he thought. But despite all of this, his logic continues to struggle with these emotions. He's still not fully ready to believe that reincarnation is real, and that Ji-eum is really the girl he lost years ago. Meanwhile, Do-yeon decides to intervene. He meets with Seo-ha and warns him that Ji-eum could be dangerous. Do-yeon tries to convince Seo-ha that her story about reincarnation might just be a fabrication and that he needs to stay away from her. However, Seo-ha starts to defend Ji-eum. He doesn't want to believe that she could have hurt him and tells Do-yeon that he needs to stop his investigation. For Seo-ha, this is the moment when he realizes that despite his doubts, his feelings for Ji-eum are real and sincere. Do-yeon doesn't want to give up, but realizes that Seo-ha has made his decision. He walks away, leaving Seo-ha and Ji-eum to sort out their relationship on their own. His doubts still linger, however, and he continues to think that Ji-eum might be hiding something else. By the end of the episode, Seo-ha decides to give himself and Ji-eum a chance. He tells her that he's willing to try to build a relationship with her, despite all the strangeness and difficulties with her past. For him, this decision is a step into the unknown, but his feelings for Ji-eum are too strong to simply ignore. He accepts that life is sometimes more mysterious than can be explained, and that their meeting is more than just a coincidence. After Seo-ha decides to give their relationship with Ji-eum a chance, the situation between them becomes calmer and more stable. They both now realize that their feelings are mutual and are willing to work on developing their relationship, despite the complexity of their history and the fact that Ji-eum's past lives still affect her present. However, there are new challenges ahead of them, involving both their personal feelings and external circumstances. Seo-ha begins to slowly get used to the idea that Ji-eum was indeed a part of his past. Although he still has a hard time accepting the fact of reincarnation on a rational level, his heart begins to open up to her more and more. Every day they spend together strengthens their bond. Ji-eum, from its side, feels that finally acquire what to strive for throughout its life. She begins to believe that their relationship can become something real and lasting. However, Ji-eum cannot completely relax. Its ability to remember their past life always as a yes, so-and-so burden. It remember all of its previous error and fear that pursued it throughout many reincarnations. She fears that their current relationship may suffer because of her past actions or because her connection to Seo-ha is based on such a complex and unusual history. These thoughts leave her uneasy, and she begins to wonder if she will repeat the same mistakes she made in previous lives. Seo-ha notices that Ji-eum still looks worried, even though they're getting closer. He begins to wonder what exactly is troubling her. Their conversations become deeper and more personal, and at one point Seo-ha asks her to tell him more about what's bothering her. Ji-eum doesn't want to reveal her fears, but realizes that there's no point in hiding them anymore. She confesses that she's afraid their relationship might suffer because of her past. Even though she wants to believe in their future, her experience of living through several reincarnations makes her cautious and ready for any surprises. Seo-ha listens to her carefully and assures her that they can overcome any difficulties together. He begins to realize that for Ji-eum, her past has become not only a part of her identity, but also a huge burden. Seo-ha promises her that he'll be there for her no matter what happens, and that they can handle any challenges that come their way. These words bring Ji-eum some relief, but she still feels that her past lives could affect their future. Meanwhile, Ha Do-yeon, who never gave up on his suspicions, continues to follow Seo-ha and Ji-eum. He sees that Seo-ha is becoming more and more attached to Ji-eum, and this worries him even more. Do-yeon can't understand why Seo-ha trusts her so much. Despite the strangeness of her story, he's still convinced that Ji-eum is hiding something, and decides to continue his investigation despite Seo-ha's warnings. Do-yeon feels he has to find out the truth, even if Seo-ha doesn't want to do it. At work, the situation escalates. Ji-eum begins to notice that her co-workers are becoming increasingly interested in her relationship with Seo-ha. Even though they try to keep their personal affairs out of the workplace, gossip spreads quickly. Colleagues discuss their affair, and it starts to put pressure on both of them. Ji-eum doesn't want her relationship with Seo-ha to become a topic of discussion at work, but she realizes there's no way to avoid it. Moreover, she begins to suspect that some co-workers may be trying to use their relationship to their advantage. One day, Seo-ha and Ji-eum encounter a serious professional problem that requires an immediate solution. Both find themselves under pressure, and the strain begins to take its toll on their personal relationship. Ji-eum sees that Seo-ha is becoming more and more immersed in her work, and begins to pull away from it to focus on problem solving. This makes her feel uneasy, because she doesn't want their relationship to suffer because of work. However, Seo-ha explains that it's important for him to deal with the current challenges so that their personal lives aren't jeopardized. This period becomes a test for their relationship. Both realize that work and personal life often overlap, and they need to learn how to deal with it. Seo-ha and Ji-eum begin to spend more time discussing their goals and priorities in order to find a balance between their professional and personal lives. Ji-eum increasingly begins to realize that their connection is more than just love, and that they both need to work on keeping it together despite the challenges. Ha Do-yeon, meanwhile, finds information that seems important to him. He learns details of Ji-eum's past that confirm his suspicions that her story involves unusual circumstances. Despite his findings, however, Seo-ha is already fully immersed in his relationship with Ji-eum and isn't willing to listen to Do-yeon's doubts again. This puts their friendship in jeopardy, as Seo-ha feels that his friend doesn't support his choices, and Do-yeon fears that Seo-ha might get hurt. After Seo-ha and Ji-eum find a way to strengthen their bond, they begin to adapt to the new realities of their life together. Their relationship, though going through many trials, grows stronger. However, the pressure from others, as well as professional and personal challenges, continue to haunt them. Ha Do-yeon, who has not abandoned his suspicions, continues to investigate Ji-eum's past and her mysterious history of reincarnations. Even though Seo-ha has already made his choice, Ji-eum feels that her past lives still haunt her. Even as she tries to focus on the present, she knows that the reality she lives in is not the same as other people's, and that her connection to Seo-ha is unique. However, the past sometimes fills her with fears and doubts. She fears that their bond with Seo-ha might suffer if the past interferes with their present again. Meanwhile, Seo-ha tries to focus on the future they can build together. His relationship with Ji-eum is what he most wants to keep despite the pressure from others and problems at work. However, their bond still remains uneasy, and Seo-ha realizes that they must continue to work on their relationship to meet the challenges they face. At work, Seo-ha faces serious challenges in running the company. One of the company's major projects begins to run into unexpected difficulties, and this causes Seo-ha have to spend more time at work. The pressure increases, and it begins to take a toll on his relationship with Ji-eum. He wants their bond to remain strong, but realizes that his absence could negatively affect their relationship. Ji-eum, seeing Seo-ha becoming more and more immersed in her work, begins to feel detached. She doesn't want to be a burden to him and tries not to show how much she cares about his constant busyness. But it's hard for her to ignore the fact that they're spending less and less time together, and it's causing her inner turmoil. Ji-eum begins to think that their relationship might be jeopardized if they don't find a way to maintain a work-life balance. Do-yeon, meanwhile, finds more and more information about Ji-eum's past. He manages to learn more about her previous lives and how they were connected to Seo-ha. Do-yeon begins to realize that Ji-eum's story isn't just a fantasy, but a reality that he's been unable to accept until now. He realizes that their connection really does go beyond a normal relationship, and that Seo-ha may have been right to trust Ji-eum. This revelation shocks him, but he realizes that he must tell Seo what he has learned. Before Do-yeon has time to talk to Seo-ha, however, a new crisis occurs in their relationship. Ji-eum is faced with the consequences of her past lives. Suddenly, she begins to lose her memories of her previous rebirths. Her ability to remember the past, which has always been part of her identity, begins to fade. Ji-eum doesn't know how to explain this, and panic overwhelms her. She fears that if she loses her memories, she will also forget Seo-ha, their history, their love. This fear causes her to shut herself away. Seo-ha notices that something is wrong with Ji-eum, but she's not ready to share her worries with him. Ji-eum is afraid that if she tells Seo-ha that her ability to remember past lives is fading, it could ruin their relationship. She feels like their bond is built precisely on her memories of the past, and without those memories, their love might lose its meaning. But Seo-ha senses that Ji-eum is pulling away, and it makes him uneasy. One day, during one of their tense conversations, Seo-ha demands that Ji-eum explain what's going on. He sees that her behavior has changed and can no longer ignore it. Ji-eum, realizing that she can no longer hide the truth, tells him about her fears. She explains that she's starting to lose her memories of past lives and is afraid that their connection to Seo-ha will disappear along with those memories. It's a very painful moment for her as she realizes that her entire identity is now threatened. Seo-ha is shocked by her confession, but instead of pushing her away, he accepts her fears with understanding. What matters to him isn't that Ji-eum remembers their past lives, but that they're together in the present. He explains that their love and connection is more than just memories of the past, and that even if Ji-eum forgets their past lives, it won't change how he feels about her. He's ready to be with her despite everything that's going on. This conversation becomes a turning point in their relationship. Ji-eum begins to realize that her connection to Seo-ha doesn't depend solely on her ability to remember the past. They both realize that their love is based on the present, and that their future depends solely on themselves. This thought brings Ji-eum some relief, but she is still troubled by the thought that she might lose an important part of her identity. After a conversation in which Ji-eum confesses to Seo-ha that she is beginning to lose her memories of past lives, their relationship experiences a profound emotional upheaval. Now that Seo-ha knows that her ability to remember her past is starting to fade, he feels that their bond is becoming even more fragile. However, instead of shutting down, Seo-ha decides to support Ji-eum in this difficult moment by showing that his feelings for her are not dependent on her memory of past lives. He is certain that their love is built on the present, not the past. Ji-eum, though she gets some comfort from Seo-ha's words, still continues to worry that she might lose her identity along with her fading memories. She begins to feel that her life is losing stability, and this causes her deep inner anxiety. She fears that one day she will wake up and no longer remember not only her past lives but also Seo-ha, their love, everything they experienced together. This fear becomes her constant companion. Meanwhile, Do-yeon, who has begun to question his skepticism after his investigation, decides to talk to Seo-ha again. He knows that his friend is facing a difficult situation and feels obligated to support him. Do-yeon apologizes for his interference and admits that he now realizes that Ji-eum's story might be true. He expresses regret for not supporting Seo-ha from the beginning, and says that he's willing to help them both under any circumstances. Seo-ha accepts Do-yeon's apology, even though their relationship has remained strained for some time. This conversation helps rebuild trust between them, and Seo-ha begins to feel that his friend sincerely wishes him nothing but the best. At the same time, Seo-ha shares with Do-yeon his fears about Ji-eum possibly losing his memory of his past lives. He explains that he fears for her future and doesn't know what he can do to help her through this problem. Do-yeon, despite his earlier skepticism, offers Seo-ha support, and together they begin to look for ways to help Ji-eum. They decide to learn more about the nature of reincarnation and the possible reasons why she's starting to lose her memories. This search for answers becomes an important part of their future plan of action, as Seo-ha doesn't want to leave Ji-eum alone in her struggle. While Seo-ha and Do-yeon try to figure out what's going on with Ji-eum, she herself becomes increasingly withdrawn. Her fears intensify as she begins to lose parts of her past life. These losses manifest themselves as gaps in her memory, where she cannot recall important events or people she has been involved with in the past. Ji-eum feels that her connection to Seo-ha may also weaken if she loses too many memories. This becomes a real nightmare for her. One day, Ji-eum unexpectedly faces a major setback at work. Because of her personal worries and memory loss, she begins to make mistakes in her professional life. Her colleagues notice her distractions, and this causes more rumors and gossip in the office. Ji-eum realizes that her personal problems are beginning to affect her work, and this further increases her anxiety. She feels that she can't handle this pressure and begins to seriously consider whether she should continue with her job if she can't be fully focused. Amidst all these worries, Seo-ha suggests that Ji-eum pause her work and focus on her health and emotional state. He wants her to take time for herself to deal with the loss of memories and try to restore balance to her life. Ji-eum, though resistant to the suggestion, realizes that she really needs time to gather her thoughts. She agrees to Seo-ha's suggestion that she take a temporary vacation to regain her composure. Meanwhile, Seo-ha and Do-yeon continue to search for answers to questions about the nature of reincarnation and how Ji-eum's memory loss can be stopped. They find several old sources and scientific studies that suggest that such occurrences may be related to emotional blocks or internal conflicts. This leads Seo-ha to speculate that perhaps Ji-eum's memory loss is related to her fears of the present. Ji-eum decides not to fight alone anymore. She begins to share her fears with Seo-ha more openly, opening up to him completely. Seo-ha reassures her that their bond doesn't depend on her past, and that they can overcome any difficulties together. This brings Ji-eum some relief, and she begins to believe that their love can survive despite the trials. Ji-eum and Seo-ha now realize that they will fight for their future, no matter what fate has in store for them. They realize that their love is not just based on memories of past lives, but on the present moment they create together. Now they are ready to move forward despite their fears and losses.